Welcome, Anne, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. And I forgot that my bio mentioned that I used to be a public school teacher. So now when I make all my bad jokes, you'll totally know where I came from. But anyways, as Tim mentioned, I am Anne Calef. I'm a research fellow with the Boston Indicators, which is the research center at the Boston Foundation. For those of you that aren't familiar with it, the Boston Foundation is Greater Boston's community foundation. We make grants to nonprofits, work in partnership with donors and funders for high impact philanthropy, and serve as a civic hub and center for information in the city. Indicators, as the research center at the Boston Foundation, analyzes key indicators of well-being and researches promising ideas to make our city more equitable, prosperous, and just. As Tim mentioned, when the pandemic began, we as a research center were really facing the same questions that I think everyone was, which was how can we pivot our work to make it relevant in this unique time in this pandemic, and how can we contribute during a shared crisis? And so with that, we decided to kind of switch our work and present real-time data from new, more creative data sources than we had previously, and move our work away from more long-term, slower research projects and towards shorter briefs, so that we can say things quickly and respond to the ever-shifting ground. And so with that, we began the COVID Community Data Lab in May 2020 as a partnership between the Massachusetts Housing Partnership and Massachusetts Housing Partnership Center for Housing Data. And since then, we've grown to include contributions from the UMass Donahue Institute and other partners. And we also benefited from some support from the Barr Foundation. And so don't know if I'm able to share my screen, unfortunately. Perhaps I joined in the wrong way. Sorry, I should have tested this.
Try it again, Anne. I think you can do it now. It was a check.
Perfect.
Perfect. Thank you.
Amazing. Okay, great. So our data lab has really consisted of two key components. The first is a data repository of weekly updated data sources. And the second are a series of briefs, which are, again, these shorter, we like to think of them as more nimble research products that are responding to key trends that we see in the data repository. Recently, we added a third component, which we're calling our recovery briefs. And these are discrete, concrete ideas from policymakers, leaders, and advocates around Massachusetts for how we can make our recovery more equitable and just. And so if you're interested in these, I would highly recommend that you check out a video of a recent webinar that we did on our website. And there you can listen to all 14 authors really present the ideas themselves. For this presentation, I'm going to share research findings from 5 domains: public health with an emphasis on equity, housing, economic impacts, social assistance, and mobility patterns. We all lived through the past year, so I think a lot of this information is stuff that will feel familiar. It's probably putting numbers to your experience, maybe what you've seen in communities. And the hope is really just to show how useful tracking data in these moments of crisis can be to progressive policy and action. Beginning with public health, tracking the pandemic itself has not been a big focus of our COVID Community Data Lab, but we do have some briefs on our website that look at the disparate impacts the pandemic has had on communities, particularly communities of color. And a common thread through all of these briefs is that we as a state have not been effective in preventing the spread of COVID in lower income, predominantly communities of color. And so we began this work with the UMass Donahue Institute, looking at COVID case rates at a town level and comparing it with various social and demographic variables. And so one of those was overcrowding, which is the share of units with one or more occupant per room. As you can see, cities and towns that have a higher share of units with overcrowding have much higher COVID case positivity rates. So Chelsea, Lawrence, Lynn, Receveur, some of our gateway cities are really jumping out at the top there, being impacted by this. We also looked at income, and we found that cities and towns with the lowest per capita income or per person income had some of the highest case rates as well. And so again, Lawrence, Chelsea, Receveur are gateway cities experiencing both lower incomes and higher COVID case rates. We also work with the Donahue Institute to look at COVID death rates. And so when we look at crude death rates, as they're typically reported, we see that Black and white residents have higher death rates than Asian and Latinx residents. But we also know that this can be slightly misleading because COVID-19 is so much more fatal for older residents, and the Asian, Black, and Latinx populations in the state skew a lot younger than the white population in Massachusetts. And so when we adjust for the different age distributions, we found that the disparities in death rates just jump significantly, right? So when we attempt to hold age constant, we see that Asian residents are dying, the age-adjusted death rate for Asian residents is higher than for white residents. And the age-adjusted death rate for Black and Latinx residents is 3 times that of white residents in Massachusetts. We applied a similar methodology to adjust for age to vaccination rates because we were curious if these similar disparities would emerge, and knowing that the state prioritized age in their vaccination process, we wanted to attempt to adjust for that. And we found that even when adjusting for the different age distributions within each racial group, there is still a disparity that exists between Black, Latinx residents and white and Asian residents in the state. When we go to the city and town level, a similar pattern to what we saw with COVID case rates emerges, which is to say that our lower income cities and towns that have a higher share of residents of color, our gateway cities predominantly, have much lower COVID vaccination rates, even if we were to hold age, even when we hold age constant, right? So New Bedford and Fall River are vaccinating at half of what Westwood, is vaccinating. And this is, again, these are age adjusted vaccination rates. On our website, we have the crude rates in addition to these age adjusted rates. And we also do the racial disparities at a town level on our website, which are actually more stark than the state disparities and racial disparities in vaccination rates. So turning to economic impacts, we found really 2 key findings in this section. 1, that job loss has been steeper in this recession than in the Great Recession. And 2, that job loss has been much more concentrated in the lower wage service sectors. So this graph shows change in labor force by months after a pre-recession baseline. And so you can see there was a precipitous drop in jobs at the beginning of the pandemic in April of last year. And while we've regained more than half of those jobs since then, we're still well below where we were before the pandemic began. And that job loss still greatly exceeds job loss even at the peak of the Great Recession in October of 2009. Much of the jobs that have been lost are concentrated in accommodation and food services. So as you can see here, roughly 1/3 of the jobs that we have not regained as of March 2021 are in accommodation and food services. Because most of the jobs that are being lost are lower wage positions, this recession has been particularly inequality enhancing. And you can see this in this graph produced by Opportunity Insights. And here you can see that those individuals that are earning some of the highest wages in Massachusetts experienced virtually no change in employment throughout the pandemic, and in fact now have a slightly positive increase in employment, while those earning the lowest wages in the state have experienced a significant decline in employment and continue to experience a significant decline in employment. Next, I'm going to show a few graphs that help us look more closely at those individuals that have been laid off in the past year. So first, looking at race, we see that Black, African American, and Latinx residents have higher unemployment rates than white residents. And unfortunately, we don't have unemployment rates for Asian workers due to sample size limitations. But we also know that many Asian workers are employed in the service sector and Main Street businesses that have been hit very hard by the pandemic. Looking at educational attainment, those without a college degree experience unemployment rates more than double that of those that do have a college degree or higher. And then finally, turning to gender. Before the pandemic began, women in Massachusetts had a lower unemployment rate than men. And as you can see, that changed in 2020. Unemployment rates were even higher for women of color. Black women had an unemployment rate of 13% compared to 9% for white women in Massachusetts. And Latina women had an unemployment rate that was double that of white women in our state. And again, unfortunately, we don't have unemployment rates for Asian women at this time. It's important to note that, bars on our graph here, our chart, don't show the sheer volume of women that have just exited the workforce or have been pushed out of the workforce during the pandemic. So between 2019 and 2020, it's estimated that 93,000 women in Massachusetts have left the workforce compared to just 52,000 men. And a large reason that women are being pushed out of the workforce is this lack of childcare and school closings throughout the pandemic. A national study of working parents found that women are twice as likely to stay home and care for children than their male counterparts. The social assistance programs have been critical throughout the pandemic, and one extremely important program has been unemployment insurance. This graph shows initial unemployment claims by week throughout the state. And as you can see, there's this unprecedented spike on unemployment claims when the pandemic began in late March. And while unemployment claims have fallen significantly since, we're still well above where we were before the pandemic. The importance of unemployment benefits, of unemployment insurance, can also be seen in the impact that it has on other social assistance programs. So this chart shows applications to social assistance programs in Massachusetts, particularly SNAP, which is the program formerly known as food stamps. As you can see, there's a huge spike at the beginning or end of March, and a second spike in late August. And this is right after expanded UI benefits, or the first round of expanded UI benefits ended in early July. Food insecurity has been a very challenging problem for many families and many individuals. And so this chart shows the change in food insecurity rates from 2019 to 2020. And as you can see, food insecurity rates doubled for all racial groups, but almost or roughly 1 in 4 Black and Latinx individuals experienced food insecurity in 2020. And so, as part of our recovery brief series, we do have a couple of briefs that talk about how we can address, this food insecurity problem, right? Which I'd encourage you to check out if you're interested. Turning to housing, I think, here the story is a little more complex. I think folks expected the housing market to just kind of be damaged across the board. In reality, it's been a little more complicated than that. With students not returning to Boston, with many professionals perhaps moving out of the city, we have seen a decline in rents in the urban core, particularly in the most expensive sub-markets. But meanwhile, housing costs have increased everywhere else, and this is most troubling in our gateway cities, in low-cost markets, where they've actually seen rents increase, right? So Fall River, which was one of the cities and towns that had the highest COVID rates, lowest vaccination rates, lowest median incomes, has seen a 12% increase in rent prices between 2019 and 2020. How home sale prices have also risen in the past year, both for Boston and for the state. And this is showing, among other things, right, an increase in demand for living outside of the urban core. This mixture of rising home sale prices, of rising rents in some cities, combined with a loss of income, has made this a very precarious time for many renters. And so this next chart shows eviction filings, not eviction executions, but just filings. And as you can see, there was a big spike in eviction filings when the state moratorium ended in October. But since then, eviction filings have actually settled at below pre-pandemic levels, which I think emphasizes 2 critical points, which is, one, the importance that emergency rental assistance programs have had during this time. So state programs like RAFT, and then also municipal emergency rental assistance programs. It also shows, that evictions, or rather reminds us that evictions were a pre-pandemic crisis in, greater Boston. And in order to really address evictions as a problem, as a crisis, we need to address underlying causes, including the lack of affordable housing. And so I'll end this presentation with mobility patterns. So turning to MBTA, this graph shows MBTA ridership across the rapid transit lines and also the bus. And so you can see here that there was a steep decline in transit usage, transit ridership when the pandemic began. And while it has returned slowly, slightly, we see that throughout the entire pandemic, the bus, which is that purple line, and the blue line, which is the blue line on this graph, have consistently maintained the most ridership throughout the pandemic. And this really shows how essential transit has been to our frontline workers. And you can see that in this map here, which shows the bus routes that have maintained the highest share of their pre-pandemic ridership. And you can see that the lines that have maintained even 75% of their ridership are serving areas with higher shares of frontline workers or workers in frontline industries. So again, really emphasizing how essential transit has been to our frontline workers. And I think throughout the pandemic, there's been a growing recognition of the importance of bus service. I'm in Worcester right now, and Worcester has made their bus service free throughout the pandemic and is figuring out if that's going to be a permanent change. But again, just how important transit has been. Like transit, traffic has also declined dramatically, which I think many of us welcomed. This graph shows, or these series of graphs show gantry data along the Mass Pike moving west to east towards the inner core. And the gray dotted line at the top is pre-pandemic traffic. The orange dotted line at the bottom is traffic at the lowest of the low in early April. And then the thick blue line is traffic the last week of March. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to update this graph before the presentation. But you can see that outside of the urban core, traffic has pretty much returned to where it was before the pandemic. And as we get closer to downtown Boston, we're not quite there yet. I think many of us that, are driving or have driven, in the past couple of weeks might feel that traffic has actually, we're getting closer and closer to that pre-pandemic level. I think probably, I know I really do not want traffic to go back to where it was or much less get worse. And so we think that this is really a time to implement new strategies, right? How do we think creatively about making sure that these problems that existed before the pandemic do not return? How do we ensure that the problems that existed before the pandemic are not further exacerbated, right, in our recovery period? And so with that, I'll just close here. And so, these are some of the recovery briefs that we've hosted on our website, the authors that we hosted on our event in mid-April. And again, presenting policy solutions to some of these challenges that we just saw in the data, right? So, for example, could we implement congestion pricing, right? This is a strategy to hopefully reduce traffic in our cities. And, Chris Dempsey, who's the head of transportation for Massachusetts, presented this idea. How can we invest in childcare as infrastructure, which I think is, a big buzzword now. But in Massachusetts, right, how can we do that? How can we push towards a more universal childcare system so that women are able to enter and stay in the workforce, even in moments of crisis like this? And, how can we take advantage of buildings that Cobot has made available, such as office space, right, in the inner core, to build more affordable housing that we need to address our housing crunch? And again, these are just 4 of the briefs. We have a total, I believe, of 14 on our website that really attempt to move us forward toward a more just and equitable recovery. So I will stop sharing my screen now, and thank you for that. I see there are possibly some questions in the chat. So,
Anne, would you like me to read them to you as they're coming in, or?
Sure, that'd be great. Yeah.
So Chen Chi says, how can we address the lack of data on the Asian population?
Yeah, I really appreciate this question. It's something that I've been thinking about a lot, especially now that it's Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. I think the ongoing challenge is this sample size limitation. In Massachusetts, the Asian population is much smaller than it is in, for example, California or other Western states. I think with time, these rates will, the Bureau of Labor Statistics will release their estimates for Massachusetts for Asian workers. But I think that we do have to think a lot more creatively on this, and so at Boston Indicators, we've tried to calculate unemployment rates and other methods so that we could include Asian workers. I think there's actually a brief earlier from the pandemic on our website. And I think, not only, the question is not only how do we get more data on Asian populations, how do we get the more specific data, right? Disaggregate the data. We know that the experience of, like the Cambodian community living in Lowell, it could be very different from, Asian communities living in some of the suburbs, right? And how can we disaggregate our data to really tell these different stories? So it's like a half answer. But I'm happy also to connect outside of this webinar if you want to talk further.
And I think that's the next, I got a follow up from Chinchi, and it says, how can community-based organizations like Asian Women for Health help with the data gap?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, right? I think, working collaboratively with organizations that are really on the ground is a huge component of this. So yeah, I appreciate that.
The next question is from Samantha, who says, does the Boston indicators make forecast the data out to the future, or does it make predictions at all, is I guess what the question is.
It's a great question. I think, at least throughout my work with the COVID Community Data Lab, we have not made predictions. Making predictions is a lot more complicated than, just tracking the data as it is now. I think typically we don't do a lot of forecasting. There are some briefs on our website that maybe get a little closer to this. In particular, I'm thinking of a brief that we did on the school age population in Boston and looking at, kids in Boston. I think there are maybe some more forward-looking estimates there, but in general, I would say we shy away from forecasts and more towards analyzing the trends as they come.
So any other questions for, do you have workshops on how to use data for storytelling or data visualization?
I mean, again, former elementary school teacher, would love to do workshops on that. That is not something that we are currently doing. I will say that if we are invited to speak, we love to go and speak. So, I think if it's something that, a partnership that, if it's something that we could serve, community organizations, I imagine, we always love to present our work. We haven't done like actual workshops per se on how to do the storytelling, but I think it could be, it'd be wonderful to do. So we don't typically host them, but we like to work in partnership with organizations.
All right, well, thank you, Anne, for being here today. Really appreciate it. Appreciate the work that the COVID Community Data Lab does. It cuts into so many of the focus areas that people have here today. So thank you again. And I know you're really busy, so appreciate your time.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Okay, take care. All right, and for this next section, I've got just a quick poll just to put up on digital surveys. So we've got Dr. Amelia Kohm coming up in just a few minutes, but I wanted to quickly go through some platforms that we have. I just want to show you some free and cheap platforms for data collection and some of the best practices that we've seen. And I just want to kind of get an idea of who's using what platforms. So Google Forms and SurveyMonkey are the top ones so far. Give everybody just another minute to vote. All right. Okay, so it's a tie. We've got people are either using Google Forms, SurveyMonkey, and 3 people said something else. So let's see, sorry. I'll end that polling. And let me pull up a quick presentation for you. All right, and I hope that some of this bridges the gap between what you'll hear later on. And I want to give you a quick primer on a few recommendations for tools to quickly and cheaply collect data. Some of this people are already using, but I know a lot of you are already conducting surveys, but this might give you some new ideas, ideas to improve your collection or add a new tool to what you're already doing. One of the things you'll see later on, I think Dr. Khan will show you this as well, but Mentimeter, measuring online, it's a question and real-time results, short answers. It measures the pulse of the room and fosters engagement with the presenter. When we look at bigger surveys, though, what we see is there was a Stanford survey, social innovation review last year, and 88% of the nonprofit respondents said that they are gathering feedback was a major priority in measuring impact. But when they asked the questions, only 13% felt they were gathering feedback effectively. And the people that said that it was a problem said that their main barriers to success was a lack of staff capacity and resources. So some of the reasons why we collect survey data, and we can just go through this quickly, but marketing and idea gathering, test messaging concepts, taglines, photos, gathering donor feedback, fundraising, strategic planning, things like that. When we look at best practices and what's worked on survey design, number one is come up with a clear, obtainable goal for your survey. So when we say that, instead of a high level goal, like I want to better understand our customers, say I want to better understand why people are subscribing to our newsletter or unsubscribing, a little bit more focused. And once you come up with a goal, you can use it as a reference to prioritize the top questions you want to ask in your survey. Second one is keep the personal questions to the end. So you want to treat your survey like a conversation. So if you're meeting somebody for the first time, you wouldn't start by asking them how old they were. So kind of keep those personal questions at the end. Don't let your survey get too long. Respondents are doing you a favor by answering your survey, so respect their time, and you'll be rewarded with a higher completion rate and better responses. Final one here is closed-ended questions. So closed-ended questions are things like multiple choice checkbox, things that are easy to answer for participants. And that will provide you with your quantitative data for your analysis. It is also important to collect open-ended questions and get feedback from your participants in their own words, though. So, maybe one or two of those at the end it would be welcome and provide you with that feedback. Some other ways to best practices for your surveys, including a survey incentive in your survey. Ask even a T-shirt. Match their funds that they provide to you, or if they answer, enter them in a sweepstake, something like that. Don't ask leading questions. So, in other words, I wouldn't ask how helpful or unhelpful was today's amazing training. It's a kind of a loaded question. So more how helpful, unhelpful. Also keeping choices balanced, giving a range of questions from very good to very bad is the way you want to go. And then absolutes is something that can really hurt your survey quality as well. So words like every, always, all, those kind of words, you definitely want to avoid those. Say, you're asking, do you always eat breakfast? Like probably nobody would all the time, but most would sometimes. And anyway, giving people a range is good. And then you definitely want to preview your survey before sending it out. So test it with internal staff, test it with a few people that would be getting it just to see if you've got the right questions and you're not missing anything. For privacy and protecting personal information, this is just as important to putting together a useful survey. You want to protect the privacy of your respondents and protect their personal information. So things like anonymizing surveys when possible. So sometimes you need donor information that's not possible, but when you can, try to ensure the anonymity if you can. Use a capture question at the end of this to ensure that bots don't pose as humans and make any malicious attempts to disrupt your data, your surveys, or your system. Another one is enable SSL. So this is secure sockets layer, and sometimes it's as easy as a checkbox, but it protects your website or your form from phishing scams, data breaches, and other threats. And then once you get the data, if you're doing Google Forms, some of you are, there's permissions-based protections on those drive folders. You have things like Dropbox that put passwords on files. And then when you can, share your results in the aggregate. If you've got personal information, you can put that as a separate form, separate file that you can link to and protect it more. So when we look at the tools that are out there and what's best for your organization, it's a crowded field. There are hundreds of platforms out there, and there are never 100% right or wrong answer of when you select a tool. Some have features that work for you, and for PeaceTech Lab, when we're looking at this, we make a decision on free or cheap tools that are easy to set up, easy to secure. So Google Forms, this is something that if you took our pre-event survey, and thank you to those who did, we really appreciate it. This is something people could answer the survey. It's free, it's secure, it's got permissions based on it so people can't see the results outside of PeaceTech Lab. It aggregates results so you can see trends of what people are answering. We can do skip logic and we can download the spreadsheets as we go. For Google Forms, it gives us the things like short answers, paragraphs, multiple selection, verification boxes, pull downs, if you haven't used it. This is an example of aggregating the data from our pre-event surveys that we sent you. So looking at organization type on the right there and the topic of interest on the left. So we can kind of quickly get an idea of who's coming and how to set up the sessions. The downsides to Google Forms, obviously Google account is required for that. So if you don't have that, you can't set it up. You always need internet to run that. So if you're online and offline a lot, that could be a problem. It's difficult sometimes to collect pictures, barcode signatures. You can do it, but it takes a little bit of a setup to make that happen. You can't customize the design very much. It doesn't integrate with your own system. If you're using like a Salesforce or Zoho or Insightly, it doesn't connect to that. And there are limitations on the sizes for the data itself coming in. Another platform I would recommend, and this one is just really come onto our radar not that long ago, but it's called Question Pro. And it's a program I would recommend if you're a nonprofit especially. So they have a free service for nonprofits, a free license that never expires. They have survey templates for nonprofits already set up for event feedback, for questionnaires, for donations. And some of the feedback, some of the features on there, unlimited surveys, unlimited responses, no credit card required. They've got 25 question types, customization, shareable dashboards, 24/7 support. So it's really good. And if you are a nonprofit, what you can do is go to TechSoup, and they even have a higher level for $97 a year that gives you chat support, Salesforce integration, ability to work across teams, ability to work offline, multilingual, and things like that. So if you're interested in that, let us know. We can provide the funds to get the $97 a year. There's the free version as well, and happy to help you get that set up if it might be of interest. And the last one I wanted to quickly highlight was Cobot Toolbox, which is a platform that we use internationally. And it's good for challenging environments when you have to collect out in the neighborhoods where you might not have the latest phone, you might not have internet. And this might be the tool for you if that's the case. It's based in Cambridge, so it's local, free to use, works online and offline, and it has encryption, end-to-end encryption and SSL already added to it. It's also highly customizable, creates great summary reports with graphs and tables, and provides free mapping tools, including heat maps, clustering, and base layers. And then I showed the beginning, there was a lot of different tools that are out there. And one of them, a lot of these tools, they have a freemium model. And so the freemium model is like limited questions, responses, really can't do branding. Some of you use SurveyMonkey already. You might be paying for that, but there's this kind of freemium model. And a lot of the platforms that are out there, they have a paid model that kind of elevates the functionality past the freemium model. And so this is something, as I mentioned before, it's you can work across teams, you can do branding, advanced skip logic, you can integrate it with your systems like Salesforce and Zoho. And most of those cost about anywhere from $65 to $100 a month for teams. And last one, before I turn it over to Amelia, I just want to tell you there's a platform, survey resource platform for nonprofits called Listen for Good. And I will share this out with everybody. I'll share the presentation too, so you don't need to take notes for all this. But Listen for Good is it's a mentoring software or mentoring and software package to gather and incorporate feedback from your beneficiaries. So this is a platform that was started by the Hewlett Foundation, the Gates Foundation, and the James Irwin Foundation. So that is something just to check out. You can sign up for it, and then they provide mentoring. They provide a lot of resources for you. So with that, I think that is, this is just some of their findings, but after working with this Listen for Good organization, 63% of nonprofits are making changes to the program offerings, 45% are making changes to their operations to be more respectable client preferences and experiences, and 31% are offering new services. So with that, I will come back and see if there are any questions at all. Yeah, so focuses on conducting, or sorry, resources on conducting focus groups. And I know we have a couple of those. Let me, if you can put your email in, I'll send you that. And I'll also send you, we've got a breakdown of all the different platforms that are out there, the kind of the pros and cons of each platform and the cost for that. And we're happy to send that on. Oh, thank you, Chinchi, appreciate that. I'll send that out to you. And with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Amelia. Dr. Amelia Kohm is the founder of DataViz for Nonprofits. It's my pleasure to welcome her back. She was with us in New Orleans last month. She's here today to provide training on data analytics and visualization best practices. She's had more than 25 years of experience studying, funding, and evaluating human services. And through DataViz for Nonprofits, Amelia provides high-quality data visualizations for nonprofits to help them quickly grasp their data, improve their work, and show their impact. And she's worked with every type of nonprofit imaginable, arts and education to human service, health and advocacy. So with that, welcome back, Dr. Kohm, and appreciate you joining us today.
Well, it's wonderful to be back with you, Tim, and to be with all of you in Boston. I'm actually in the Chicago area, so I hope it's a beautiful day in Boston. We have a lot to cover today, and it's going to be both fun and informative. So fasten your seatbelt, sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight. So who am I? So Tim already shared a little bit about me, but you should know that I love evidence, but I hate spreadsheets. I have more than 25 years of experience studying, funding, and evaluating human services, primarily as a researcher at Chapin Hall, which is a child policy center at the University of Chicago. And at Chapin Hall, I worked a lot with organizations and their data and came to know the difficulties that many organizations face in using data well. And I felt there had to be a better way for organizations without high-level data analysis skills in-house to extract meaning quickly and painlessly from their data, because right, all organizations have data, and to put that data to work for them. And that's when I got interested in data visualization, or data viz for short. I got training in data visualization from the University of Washington, and I started doing it at my research center and also taking on my own clients. And I now help nonprofits, consultants, and foundations to visualize data through my consulting business called Data Viz for Nonprofits. So now that you know a bit about me, it's your turn to tell me a bit about you. So to do this, I'm going to put a link in the chat, and please click on, so just click on the link. What you'll see is this very, very tiny survey. Just 2 questions here. I'm going to go ahead and put that in the chat. Oops, did that go to everyone? No, I don't think it did. Hold on a second. Set on the wrong thing.
No, it didn't go.
There we go. So click on that link. I'm going to show you the live page here. So you just answer these two questions. I love to quantify, categorize, rate, and analyze. So I'm going to strongly agree with that. And oops, little internet problem. Data can make the invisible visible and help us to overcome biases. I'm going to strongly agree with that. Oops. Excuse me. Maybe your computer is not as slow as mine at the moment. Oh, I'm getting an error. Well, hopefully you're not getting an error. Okay. So what happens is once you answer those questions, this orange circle will tell you what your data personality is once we catch up. Are other people having a problem with this, or is it just me?
It's coming up for me, Amelia.
Okay, good. Okay, well then it doesn't matter that it's a problem for me. So you can just put, once you find out where your data personality is by seeing where the orange circle here lands, you can scroll over the circle to learn more about your data personality. But I'd also love for you to just introduce yourself in the chat, give me your name, maybe the organization you work with, and if you're comfortable, share your data personality as well. I'm gonna just get out of this because I seem to be stuck. So again, just put your name, organization, and your data personality if you feel like sharing it in the chat. Okay, Jennifer's wonky. Nice to meet you, Jennifer. I'm wonky as well. Sam from Boston Matters is intimidated. Cool, that's fine. All categories are good. And we got Chris is another wonky. Okay, you guys, how about you just continue to put it in? I'm gonna, since I want to make the best use of time, just see. Tim is intimidated. Let's see. Tianqi is right in the middle, right? So you follow along one of those lines. Okay, great. Excellent. I'm gonna just keep going. And feel free to, if you haven't already put in your name and your personality, go ahead and do that. Okay, so just some housekeeping. So questions, as Tim mentioned, feel free to put questions that you have for me in the chat window at any time. If it's an urgent question because you need clarification on something I just said, feel free to turn on your microphone and just ask me. All right, so this is what we're going to cover today. It's a lot, but I'm pretty sure we can get through all of it. So I'll first talk about the problems with and the potential of data, and then we'll launch into what data viz is and why it's important. We'll kind of get to more the heart of the matter, which are what are the key elements of effective data visualizations? How do you choose a chart for the data that you have and the purpose that you have? We'll look at some data viz tool options, including free ones. We will then do a data viz in action, a live demonstration. I'm going to use Tableau to show you how to visualize some data. And then I'll share with you some resources to sort of continue your data viz journey beyond this workshop. I'm pretty sure we'll have some time for some of these, for some bonus topics at the end. I have 3 bonus topics. If we don't have time for all of them, then I will we'll vote on which ones are most popular and I'll cover those. Okay, so our first topic is the problems and potential of data. So let's talk about why you don't use data, or really use data as much as you might. I have found in my career that there are 6 really common reasons that organizations don't make better use of data, and they're all quite understandable. So the first is data aversion or naivete. So we had a couple intimidated people, so they understand this. Nonprofit staff tend to have expertise in a variety of issues, right? The environment, the arts, health, education, but not data analysis. It's not a common part of your skill set. So some actually have a downright data aversion. They admit or even proudly proclaim that they're not numbers people. So that, of course, gets in the way of making better use of data. Another problem, of course, is the time crunch. This is why we don't do a lot of things that we would like to do. We're struggling to stay afloat, to submit the next proposal, to maintain programming, to address the huge and varied needs of our clientele, cultivate new donors, but digging through data is really put on the back burner. Fear is another very understandable reason that people don't make better use of data. Nonprofits, staff may fear that they won't be able to control the story, or that data will be taken out of context, that they might be compared to other organizations which aren't indeed comparable. And they fear that funders will withdraw support based on data, no matter how much funders might talk about continuous quality improvement and such. Dirty data. So you may have heard this term. Some nonprofit staff have low-level staff members entering data into management information systems or spreadsheets. Others might have multiple staff members entering data, and each person's entering it in a different way. And the result can be what we call dirty data. So that's data that is inaccurate because it's not been entered in a consistent manner. So for example, if a participant is entered into your database once as Michael Smith, and then he drops out of your program and he shows up 6 months later and he gets entered in again as Michael B. Smith, then as far as your data concerned, these are 2 different people, and tracking his progress through your programs is going to be really difficult. Wrong data. So many nonprofits have data on their participants and financials, but they often lack the kind of data they really need to show impact. So a tutoring program may not have their participants' school grades or test scores, because of FERPA laws, it's hard to get that data out of school districts. An employment program may not have data on former participants' wages over time, but that's a really important measure of impact for them. It's just really hard because former participants have dispersed. You don't have current contact information from them, and even if you did, that's a pretty heavy lift to get that data. A lot of people don't respond to surveys and that sort of thing. So outcomes are can be harder to quantify and require surveys of participants, and organizations often lack the time and funds to collect that kind of data from participants. Disconnected data. So rather than having a central management information system, smaller nonprofits and nonprofit staff may store their data on separate Excel or Google spreadsheets. So if Michael Smith's demographics are on one sheet and his attendance in various programs are on another sheet, that's going to make analysis of the relationship of, say, age to program participation really difficult, right? Because that data is in 2 different places. Okay, so those are the 6 reasons you probably don't use data well, but I'm going to talk today about 2 superpowers that we all have, and one of them is data. So most organizations have lots of data packed away in databases and spreadsheets that they're not putting to good use. And data is the way we know what we do is worthwhile. We can think of it as a tool. We don't invest in other tools, say, for example, computers, and then just store them away and rarely use them. That's often what we do with data. We invest a lot of time collecting the data and storing the data, but then we don't make good use of it. Even really small organizations collect data on many things. Here's a sample of the types of data that many nonprofits, perhaps most nonprofits, collect. Of course, participation data, program data, donations, but also visits to your website and social media traffic and volunteers. Okay, so this is the point in the workshop where I do a little commercial for data, or you might think of it as a public service announcement. And I totally understand that many of you may feel that data doesn't need a commercial. It's already overhyped, right? We hear and talk about data all the time. We hear about evidence-based practices and data-driven solutions and key performance indicators. But in all the hype around data, I think we often lose sight of its core importance. So that's why I offer you this little commercial. Data is important because of how perception occurs. What we perceive in this world is based not just on what we actually observe with our senses, what we might call data, but also what we expect to observe. So this is how it works. The brain evaluates which of a variety of probable events are actually occurring, and what we perceive is based in part on what decision the brain makes. So sure, what we perceive is also based on those incoming signals, again, what we might call data, but there are far more signals coming from within the brain, those expectations that affect our perception. So let me give you an example. It's a YouTube video. I'm not going to show it to you because my guess is many of you have already seen it. It went viral a few years ago, and it does a great job of demonstrating the power of expectations on perception. So if you're like me, you saw it as part of a presentation. The presenter said, I'm about to show you a 2-minute video. You're going to see a bunch of people passing a basketball amongst themselves. Your job is to count how many times the basketball gets passed. So if you're like me, you dutifully watched the video, you counted the number of passes, the video ends, the presenter comes back on and says, raise of hands, how many people saw a guy in a gorilla suit walk through the frame? And again, if you're like me, you did not see that guy in the gorilla suit. Presenter shows the video again, clear as day, there's a guy in a gorilla suit walking right in front or right through that group of people passing the basketball. And it's a really great demonstration that we tend to perceive what we expect to perceive. When I wasn't primed to look for that guy, I didn't actually see him. It's pretty amazing. So these inner brain signals or expectations can distort our understanding of a situation. Thus, that incoming signals or data are really important to confirming or negating our expectations. But the key is we have to pay attention to data to make that happen. Progress in organizations and really in all of human history often starts with the concession that our expectations might be wrong and that data might have something to teach us. And really that's what the scientific method is all about. It primes us to focus on data rather than expectations. We formulate a hypothesis and then use data in the outside world to see if those hypotheses hold up. Okay, so end of commercial, but I do want to also include a little disclaimer that data is part of the answer, but it certainly isn't the whole answer. Maybe love is, but data certainly is not. Data really is indeed more about asking questions than it is about answers. It can show us what questions you should be asking and help you to refine those questions. And it can also point you in the general right direction, but you are never going to have perfect and comprehensive data. And so data will never take you all the way to your answer. Also, my other disclaimer about data is that we should be wary, although not fearful of data. So we should always, when we're dealing with data, ask, where does the data come from? Is the source likely to be biased? If it's drawn from a sample, is it representative of the larger group it's supposed to be representative of? What is missing? Are there groups of people or time periods missing from the data? If so, why is that data missing? Are some respondents, for example, hard to reach, or do they lack trust in the data collector? So we should always be sort of have a healthy skepticism when we're dealing with data. Okay, so we've dealt with the problems with, or at least some of them, the problems with and the potential of data. Let's talk about what data visualization is and why it's important. And this gets at my superpower number 2, which you all have, and that's your visual acuity. So before I launch into it any further, I'm going to just ask you a quick question. You're looking at a picture, of course, of the Mona Lisa and a spreadsheet. Which image do you comprehend first, the Mona Lisa or the spreadsheet? Okay, do not put your answers in the chat window, because I'm going to just take a wild guess that you understand Mona Lisa first, and that's because our visual system has evolved over millions of years to process images essentially in parallel. So what do I mean essentially in parallel? We don't read the Mona Lisa from top to bottom and from left to right. We take it all in together and understand almost instantly that this is a picture of a woman in front of a landscape, sporting a dark dress and an inscrutable smile. But words and numbers, that's what we're seeing in the spreadsheet, only appeared within the last few thousand years. And they require us to scan individual characters, recognize them, piece them together into words or values, and then sentences and equations. And while all types of sensory information signals barrage the brain all the time, the brain is specially geared for visual signals and uses half of its volume for visual analysis. And that's because for a long time during human history, of course, our survival depended on it, right? We had to detect predators at a distance, lions hiding behind tall grass, for example. So the result is that when we use visual cues like length, colors, and size, we transfer much of the work that is needed to decode data from the slower conscious energy intensive parts of the brain to the faster parts of the brain that require less energy and results in more efficient cognition. So we're just much better at looking at bars than we are looking at numbers. Data visualizations such as charts, graphs, and maps use these visual cues to communicate data, and thus greatly speeds up our processing of data. And so addresses, at least in part, that time crunch I talked about. Data viz is a quick way also to assess how dirty, disconnected, or irrelevant our data is. If the picture doesn't look right, then we need to do something to improve the data. And sometimes that means collecting fewer data elements, but doing so more accurately. So let's test our visual superpowers again. Again, don't put your answer in the chat, but just answer for yourself. How many 9s do you see in this array of numbers? I'm going to give you 2 more seconds, because when I show you the exact same array, but give you color, you're able to pick it out much more quickly, because that's our visual superpower. We're able to pick out cues like color really, really fast. So there are 4 9s. Okay, here's another test for you. Again, just do it with yourself. Try to quickly answer these questions using the simple spreadsheet at the top. Were foundation or corporate grants consistently higher over time? And what were the trends for each type of grant? Foundation grants and corporate grants. Again, I'm going to give you 2 more seconds, because when I show you this exact same data in chart form, it's so much easier, right? We can see right away that corporate grants are consistently higher over time than foundation grants. And what's more, we can see trends that are really hard to see when we're just looking at numbers. We can see that foundation grants were relatively flat over time, except for that bump in May. And we can even see a cyclical pattern with corporate grants, right? Sort of an up, up, down pattern over each quarter, which would be extremely difficult to detect if you were just looking at numbers. Okay, so not only is data displayed visually easier to process, it actually appears to have more impact. A June 2018 Washington Post article described a series of experiments in which data displayed in charts significantly reduced the misperceptions of subjects, both liberal and conservative, on important political issues. So this chart that you're looking at shows the results of just one of those experiments. In this experiment, Republican respondents were asked whether they believed that the average global temperatures were increasing, decreasing, or remaining the same over the past 30 years. And the respondents were divided into three groups. A control group represented by the orange bars on the chart you're looking at. This group received no information. They were just asked that question about global temperatures, and then they provided their responses. Another group, represented by the gray bars, was given a textual summary of the scientific consensus on global temperatures. And then they were asked the question about what's going on with global temperatures over the past 30 years. And then that blue group, they got an actual chart showing temperature change since 1940 as measured by 4 climate institutions. And as you can see, the people who saw the chart, again, those represented by the blue bars, were the least likely to draw the wrong conclusion. Strangely enough, the textual summary, again, the gray bars, actually exacerbated the perception problem for Republicans who strongly identified with the GOP. But it's interesting, the experiments that involved liberal voters, they found the exact same thing, that people really, they didn't alter their responses when they were given no information or textual information, but they did when they were given charts. Okay, so here are some challenges most organizations face. Of course, showing the need for your services to current and prospective donors and funders, showing the impact of what you do, distinguishing your services from that of other organizations, and of course, evaluating your own progress over time and showing that progress to other stakeholders. So now let's consider how to visualize data to address each one of these needs. One way organizations use data is to make the case for the need for their services. So here's an example from over 200 years ago. In the 1800s, Florence Nightingale and statistician William Farr analyzed army mortality rates during the Crimean War in England. They discovered that most of the soldiers hadn't died in combat, but rather because of preventable diseases caused by poor hygiene. So Nightingale decided to make her case with pictures rather than tables of numbers or prose. In her words, quote, "to effect through the eyes what we failed to convey to the public through their word-proof ears," unquote. So her invention was the polar area chart, and that's what you're looking at right now. And it's sort of a variant, as you can tell, of the pie chart. So each slice of the pie shows deaths for 1 month of the war, growing larger if the deaths increased during that month. And then each slice of the pie is color-coded to show the cause of death. So the blue portions of the slices show preventable deaths, again, due to poor hygiene. The red portions show deaths due to wounds in combat, and the black portions show deaths due to other causes. So she presented this to the Queen and to the Parliament, and they could see at a glance the importance of hygiene. They quickly set up a sanitary commission to improve conditions, and indeed death rates fell. And Florence Nightingale became one of the first people to successfully use data visualization for persuasion to influence public policy. But there are plenty of other ways to show need, right? So this chart shows the prevalence of a problem using icons. It also uses color. And it really may make more intuitive sense than a bar chart, because bars are pretty abstract, right? You know, we may know they represent actual people, but when we have some kind of image that looks more like people, it might make more intuitive sense. So that's another way of showing need. This is called a quadrant chart, and it shows the relationship between two measures and can be a great way to show exactly where the need is. So I created this chart for a client who was working with a number of school districts to implement what they call deeper learning strategies. So the first thing they did, these clients of mine who are consultants, was to survey principals and teachers at the schools involved in the project and ask them questions to ascertain how important each of these deeper learning strategies were to them and how often they already put these strategies into practice. And this chart shows the overall results for all principals and teachers who completed the survey. So each dot represents one of those deeper learning strategies, and each dot is positioned to show the average importance assigned to the strategy and the average frequency of practice of that strategy. So the consultants could see at a glance that although teachers and principals already felt that the strategies were quite important, they were putting them into practice less than 50% of the time, except, of course, with the exception of direct instruction. So they could see the need was in addressing obstacles to preventing the educators from doing what they already believed was really important. So it was a great way for them to sort of isolate where the need was. Another great way of showing need is to use a strategy called putting the viewer in the viz. So the type of data that viewers are most interested in, drum roll, is data about themselves. So this is a cool way to put them in the visualization. First, you ask them to guess what a statistic is. So in this one, this is an interactive visualization. I'm just showing you a static picture of it. But as you can see, there's a slider that the user can use to answer the question. So what percent of Black non-Hispanic children experienced poverty in 2019? They use that slider to answer the question. And then it says, how did you do? Hover your mouse here to see the answer. And when they do that, they get a simple chart that shows them what they guessed, that's in red, what others guessed in black, and what the data actually show. So it can show them how close to or far off the mark they are. It's a great way to engage the viewer in the visualization by sort of placing them in there with the data. So let's talk about efficacy, making the case for efficacy. So nothing is more effective than a bar chart. It may seem tired, but we all know how to read them already. So the cognitive load is really low. Just a chart like this does a great job, and you can see right away, because of the reference line, when this organization started reaching and exceeding its goal. This type of chart makes an even stronger point by allowing a comparison of the trajectory of one group that got an intervention to another group that didn't. This viz uses a number of techniques. The type of chart is called a stacked area chart. It's also using a technique called small multiples, which allows viewers to make comparisons across charts by putting several small charts together. It also uses 100 people rather than percentages. Humans aren't great with percentages, but if you tell them to sort of imagine 100 people, they do a lot better. Of course, it's the same thing. And the notations are really helpful too in this visualization. So we can quickly see that poverty and child mortality have decreased dramatically over this 200-year period, and that basic education, literacy, democracy, and indeed vaccination, hopefully that keeps up, have all dramatically increased over the past 200 years. Another way to show uniqueness is this chart. I actually don't even know the name for this kind of chart. I don't know if there is a name, but But this chart shows a comparison of female and male students on what advanced placement tests they've taken. And it effectively shows where there is similarity and where the two groups diverge. So if you kind of read this chart from bottom to top, you can see about the same numbers, male and female test takers took Latin and statistics in the US government test. But as you move upward, you see the tests where there were many more female test takers, for example, in the languages and in the arts. Here's another way of showing uniqueness. This kind of visualization is called a tree map. It compares one organization to others using shape and color to show the number of clients. So we can quickly see that this organization called Youth Together served more clients than all the other organizations combined. And also evaluation and planning is another purpose that we can use data viz for, of course. Probably a lot of you are familiar with logic models. They're really just simple flow charts to show how an organization or a program is supposed to work in theory. So it usually has boxes or rectangles showing inputs, then intermediate outputs, and then finally an outcome. And in my experience, particularly as a researcher, logic models get a lot of play in proposals, but then kind of collect dust after you actually get funded, because the real world happens and things don't always work out as planned. So I wonder what would happen if you plugged a logic model into real-time data. Would that be a really helpful tool for evaluation and planning? And it's what I call a living logic model. And of course, it shows progress to date using color, and it's interactive. So as you can see, there's the logic models at the top, and it uses color gradations to show which elements of the model there have been more progress, that's shown in darker colors, and where there's been less progress is shown in lighter colors. And when you click on any one of those elements, you get more data in the chart below. It's sort of disaggregated data on how, in this case, individual students are doing in the tutoring program. You can also scroll over the components to learn about the different aspects of the program. This information can include images and web links as well. So it's a really cool tool to see how a plan is playing out in real life and in real time. Okay, so what are the key elements of effective data visualizations? I'm going to give you 10 of them today. Of course, it's not limited to 10, but in my experience, if you follow these 10 suggestions, of course, they're not commandments, you can almost always turn a good visualization into a great one. Okay, number one suggestion is to clean your data first. This may seem obvious, but take a look at your data before you ever visualize it. Look for missing data, duplicated data, formatting issues. Everything rides on the quality of your data, so don't skip this step. There are tools out there that will help you to clean your data. There are data validation features in both Excel and Google Spreadsheets. We're going to be looking at Tableau today. Tableau has its own tool called Tableau Prep. There's a free tool online called Open Refine that does what they call data transformation, which includes data cleaning. Encode thoughtfully. So what do I mean by encode? So encodings are just the way in which there's sort of the symbols or the abstractions for data. So rather than showing data in the form of words and numbers, you show it in terms of shapes and sizes and colors and positions. That's what I mean when I say encoding data. So researchers Cleveland and McGill, as well as some others, have studied what types of encodings people are able to decode most accurately and rank them in the following list. So what you can see is that when we want our viewers to make the most accurate comparisons, we should use things like position along a common scale and length and sometimes slope. But if we don't need them to make super accurate assessments and comparisons, using things like color hue and volume and color intensity are sufficient. So for example, we're pretty good when we see two bars saying, oh yeah, that bar is about twice as long as the other bar. But when we see two shades of green, we're hard pressed to say, oh yeah, that shade of green is twice as dark as the other shade of green. So that's what I mean when I talk about more accurate and more generic assessments. Okay, so pies, of course, are delicious, but they're often inscrutable when applied to data. So looking at this image, we can confidently proclaim when we're looking at the bar chart that the E bar is tallest. But the pie chart is showing the exact same data, and we're pretty hard pressed to pick out which pie slice is largest, right? It looks like E, C, and D are really similar size. And that's because we're not as good at assessing angles as we are at assessing length, as I just mentioned. So when we're comparing quantities of several things, bar charts are almost always better than pie charts. The only exception is when you want to compare a part to a whole. So in this case, you're looking at what part of an actual pie is eaten and not eaten. But once you get beyond 2 or maybe 3 slices, you should pretty much skip the pie chart and dust off the trusty old bar chart. Okay, highlight what's important. So once you have visualized your data in a chart, map, or graph, the story can still remain hidden, particularly from those who are unfamiliar with the data. And that's when it's time to call out data points using color and annotations. Usually when we're visualizing data, we're really immersed in the data and really understand what it's all about. But the people on the other end consuming these bar charts and pie charts and line charts aren't going to be nearly as familiar, and they're going to need some help, some signposts pointing them to the most important aspects of the visualization. Here's some CDC data on chronic illnesses, which is an example of highlighting what's important. I hope you can see it. It's a little bit light colored. This is called a parallel coordinates graph. It shows the level or amount of something across several dimensions. So in this case, we're looking at the percent of adults with chronic illnesses across states in the United States. So each line represents a state, and it uses notations in color to draw your attention to how low residents of Hawaii are in relation to other states on rates of depression. So you can see, you know, we have along the x-axis, we have different chronic illnesses. If you go all the way, almost all the way over to the right, you can see depression, and you can see that I'm highlighting that Hawaii is the lowest state on depression. I also use a notation to show which state is highest on depression, which is Oregon, according to this data. So it's just an example of how you can kind of lead the viewer through the viz. Showing order is really important when visualizing data. So ordered data should be shown in a way that our perceptual system intrinsically senses as ordered. Conversely, unordered data should not be shown in a way that implies an ordering that doesn't actually exist. So these two series of charts on top and on bottom show the exact same data, but the charts on the bottom are ordered in descending order. What you're looking at is the percent of health visits that included depression screening across different care teams in family medicine, pediatrics, and women's health for community-based health center. The bars that are not ordered kind of just make the viewer's job more difficult, where it's really much easier for the viewer to pick out which teams are meeting goals and which are falling below the goals when we do it in that descending order. We could find the top team and the lowest team really easily. Number 5 is to clarify with color. So there are a variety of different things you should think about when applying color to your visualizations. Don't use the same color hue for two different variables. Don't use the same color saturation for different magnitudes of the same variable or data field. Don't use too many color encodings on one dashboard. And bright, fully saturated colors are kind of like yelling. You don't want to yell all the time. People will think you're crazy and stop listening to you. So moderate color as you would moderate your voice, and only yell when you have a really important point to make. Then provide all of the other information in softer, less saturated colors to provide a contrast. So here's the worst data dashboard of all time. It kind of just breaks almost all the rules that I just mentioned. It's using the same colors to mean different things in side-by-side charts. It's using a lot of different colors in one chart, and it's using bright, fully saturated colors, sort of across the board. Do these two charts look the same to anyone? If so, that might mean that you have red-green color blindness. 7 to 10% of men are red-green colorblind. It's a much lower prevalence in women. Just fun fact, that's because it's on the X chromosome, and the chances of having it on both your X chromosomes, if you're a woman, is really low. So what this means for data visualization is that since a pretty large percentage of people do have this problem, we should take that into consideration. Try not to put red and green hues next to each other, because they're going to be really hard for people to distinguish who have this kind of color blindness. These maps show that same CDC chronic illness data again, and it uses what's called a diverging color palette to emphasize contrast. So the blue shades show high ranks on 2 health indexes. So they show where there are healthier adults in the country. The orange shades show lower ranks on the health index. So that's where there are less healthy adults. And then the gray tones are somewhere in the middle. So by using this sort of contrasting color scheme, we're able to pick out, for example, that corridor of poor health in the Southeast. 6 is to delete what's unnecessary. So if you've read anything by Edward Tufte, who is sort of the great grandfather of modern data visualization, you know about the data to ink ratio, which should be as close to 1 as possible, according to Tufte. And we might today think more about the data to pixel ratio. But the idea is the same, and it's a good thing to keep in mind. To eliminate ink or pixels that don't directly communicate data and just would serve to distract from the data. What we are looking for is sort of a clean look that focuses attention on key data points and just eliminates those distracting elements. So here we have 2 charts, again, showing the exact same data. But what I've done on the charts on the bottom is I've removed those grid lines. I removed the data labels, and I've just replaced them with just directly labeling each line rather than having that color legend. What I really want the viewer to do in this case is just to compare the 2 trajectories. So I don't really need all of this data, which can be distracting. I just want them to draw the conclusion that group A diverged from group B in July, and the divergence was quite dramatic. Okay, Tamara Munzer at the University of British Columbia talks about trying to avoid unjustified 3D. So let's take a look. So here is 2 pie charts. One uses that sort of nifty option that we often see in Excel to make your charts look 3-dimensional, but that is a problem. To make something look 3-dimensional on a 2-dimensional plane, you have to use techniques which tend to distort the image and thus distort the data. So one of the techniques is called foreshortening, in which you reduce the parts of the image that are supposed to look further away in space and increase the size of images that are supposed to look closer in space. But as you can see, these pie charts show the exact same data, but when we distort the pie chart to make it look 3D, we kind of screw up the angles. And even though the pie chart is, as we can see in the two-dimensional one, each slice is exactly the same size. In the three-dimensional one, it looks like that red slice is much larger because we had to make it look, we had to make it larger to make it look like it's three-dimensional. Also, to create the illusion of 3 dimensions, another technique is to obscure some objects with others to make it appear that one object's in front of another. But of course, this is a problem for accurate assessment as well. In the top chart, the green bars are barely visible. Rather than have that third axis, you can just use color, which the chart uses anyway, to distinguish between groups A, B, and C. And so it's much easier to assess the lengths of those 3 groups in the two-dimensional chart. Number 8 is also from Tamara Munzer, and she calls it eyes beat memory. And it simply means that moving our eyes between side-to-side views is much easier than making comparisons between charts, one that we're looking at currently and one that we looked at a few seconds ago. It's really hard to hold a chart in memory and compare it to one that we're currently looking at. So that's the beauty of these small multiples charts. This is a great small multiples chart by Doug McCune, who also has a great blog. It really shows the power of eyes over memory. So the small charts are all laid out together to make it easy for your eyes to scan across them. And what you're looking at is crime data. So each one of these small charts shows a different crime. The yellow bars on top show the number of crimes during daytime hours, and the blue bars on bottom show the number of crimes during evening hours. And we can quickly see that driving under the influence and drunkenness occur more often during the night, and that suicide and trespassing occur more often during the day. Zoom in. So when you do need to show visualizations in a series one by one, you should always start with the most general and then zoom into the more specific. So here's an image of a series of visualizations, 2 of which you've already seen using that CDC chronic illness data. The maps give you just a general sense of where there are health concerns in the country, according to this data set, such as that corridor of poor health in the Southeast. Then I showed the parallel coordinates chart, which helps to compare states on specific illnesses and conditions. And then there was a last chart, which I didn't share with you, that allows the viewer to really interact with the data and dig into trends and possible predictors of good and poor health. Okay, so my last adjustment is that visualization is not always the way to go. This is not always better. There are at least 2 different situations in which I think you would do much better with a spreadsheet than you would, or just a simple chart than with a simple table than with a graph or map or chart. So the first case is when you have a diverse but very engaged audience. So these folks are highly motivated to ascertain certain data. They're not going to be annoyed by having to find the data on a table, but they're also diverse in their interests. Tables use paper or screen real estate really efficiently. You can fit a lot of rows and columns in a small space, allowing users with different interests to find the data that they want in a single table. So that might be one case in which you would just go ahead and use a table. Another case is when you have many units of measure. So for example, you want to show the height, weight, location, and satisfaction level of 100 participants in a healthy eating program. This involves 4 different units of measure. We're looking at inches, pounds, latitude and longitude, and survey ratings. And such complexity is really difficult to represent on a single visualization. So you might want to go with a table in that situation as well. Okay, so how do you choose a chart for your data and the purpose that you're after? I'm going to show you some good resources to use in choosing charts. These are on the handout that Tim's going to share with you that comes with the workshop, so no need to take a screenshot or write any of these down. The Data Visualization Catalog is a free website. It's a great place to look up various types of charts and see what they're good for. So I highly recommend this catalog online. I also highly recommend Andrew Abella's simple decision tree called Chart Suggestions, a Thought Starter. You can also find it online, but again, it will be shared with you in the handout. It's based on Gene Zelazny's classic work called Saying It with Charts. And the decision tree, as you can see, starts in the middle with the basic question, what do you want to show? And then it provides 4 options. You can show a comparison. So you have 2 or more groups of things or people, and you want to see which group is largest, the smallest, highest, lowest. That would be a comparison, and it kind of then leads you through a number of different other questions to help you arrive at a chart that would be appropriate to show that type of comparison. Distribution is when you have a bunch of data points, for example, the ages of participants in a program or the test scores of students in a class, and you want to show how spread out or sort of bunched up those data points are. In which case you would follow that distribution leg of the flow chart. Composition is when you want to understand who or what makes up a larger group, such as how many of the participants in a program are in different age brackets, or how many have been in a program for different lengths of time. And then finally, relationship, you want to show if one thing is related to another, either at one point in time or over time. Does, for example, more participation in a mental health program correlate with less distress over time? Do those with lower incomes have higher heart rates over time? That would be a type of chart showing a relationship. So once you've answered the basic question, again, the decision tree helps you to choose a specific chart for the type of data that you have. This one's come from Flowing Data, which is also just in general a great data viz blog. And it focuses on the type of data you have and then recommends a chart type. The types of data are categorical data, so data that just puts units into a category. So think colors, gender, ethnic group, those are categorical data. Ordered data is data that has 2 or more categories, just like the categorical data, but those categories can be ordered. So when you think of those survey responses where they ask you whether you strongly agree, disagree, or strongly disagree with something, that's ordered data, right? Because strongly agree is more than agree, but we don't know how much more it is. We just know it's more than agree. So that's what we call ordered data. And then finally, there's continuous data, which is data that can be measured along a continuum and have a numerical value. So think dollar amounts or numbers of participants, that sort of thing, where we know that if someone makes $10 an hour, that's half as much as $20 an hour. We can actually do calculations with this data. Okay, and this decision tree is from Stephanie Evergreen, who's also a data viz guru, and it's focused on common purposes you have for visualizations, such as showing survey responses or showing change over time. Indeed, there are a lot of other decision trees out there. These are just 3 of my favorites. Okay, data viz tool options for you. Let's talk about tools for creating data visualization. There are 2 primary types of tools. There are spreadsheets like Excel and Google Sheets, and then there are programs specifically designed for data viz like Tableau. And we're going to just use Excel and Tableau sort of stand-ins as examples of these 2 major types. So spreadsheet tools are, of course, electric worksheets that display data in tabular form in columns and rows, and each data point is stored in a cell and can be manipulated by setting up formulas. And when you want to visualize data, they can be created sort of after you've analyzed the data to highlight a particular insight. But you usually need to have an idea of what you want to show. You kind of have gone through an analysis before building the chart. Data visual tools typically connect to third-party tools to pull in the data. And then they have user-friendly functionality like drag and drop features and drop-down menus. So users can easily build charts and really, through this process of building charts, explore the data freely without knowing the answer of what you want to show ahead of time. They allow you to see correlations and trends and then sort of dig down to understand what caused them. They also allow you to make visualization an interactive experience even for the viewer, which can be harder to do in Excel and other programs like it. Tableau can be connected to live data and so updated automatically, whereas this can be more cumbersome in programs like Excel. So here's a list of free data visualization programs. Again, you're going to get this list in your handout, so no need to jot any of this down. We're going to be looking at Tableau Public in action today, but you've probably heard of Power BI. Maybe some of these other programs are less familiar to you, but you might want to check them out. I don't have time to go through each one of them, but they're all great tools for different purposes. If you're interested in investing in a data visualization tool, a really comprehensive list of tools can be found at this website. Again, you're going to get this link that just covers a vast array of data visualization tools that you can consider, not just free ones, but ones that you can purchase on a subscription basis as well. Okay, I've done a lot of talking at you. If you have any questions right now, feel free to put it in the chat. If you don't have any questions, maybe we'll just take 5 minutes right now and you can grab a cup of coffee or just do whatever you need to do. And then we'll come back for the second part of the presentation. But I'm gonna hang out, so if you have any questions, feel free to put it in the chat.
Yeah, thanks, Amelia. You probably need a cup of coffee too.
I'm good. I'm good. Just gonna set up the second half well. Tim, are you in Virginia?
Yeah, I'm down in Hampton Roads, so close to the North Carolina border.
Is it a nice day today?
Yeah, it's beautiful out. It's
Yeah.
cooler than it has been. So yeah,
Yeah, we've had this very cool spring in Chicago. Still in the 50s. I'm still wearing sweaters.
yeah, we get this kind of mix of 90-degree days and 65-degree days. It's
Yeah,
I don't know if it's global warming or just a weird spring here, but
right. Oh, I see. There's a
oh,
question from Samantha. Is there a cost to Tableau? Yes, Samantha, I'm going to be going over this in a moment, but I'll just, there, Tableau Public is the free version of Tableau, and that's completely free. In your handout that you'll get from Tim is our instructions on how to download it, but really you can just Google Tableau Public and you'll get to the download page. And I'm going to go through the sort of compare and contrast the subscription version to the free version. But the subscription version you should know that there are some free licenses that you can get from Tableau if you're under a certain budget amount, like maybe 5 million. But don't quote me on that if you're a nonprofit. The other thing you should know with the subscription when you're looking at the different prices is that Tableau does offer, I believe, a 25% discount to nonprofits. And Tim, you've been talking to Tableau too, right?
yes, yeah, we're actually going to be talking to the Tableau Foundation later this month, and hopefully they can support something bigger for Road to Equal Justice.
Okay, great.
And I would say even before that, like if anybody, if you go through this and you want to have a Tableau license for the more expensive version, like let us know. And that's something PeaceTech Lab can cover.
Yeah. And like I said, Samantha, stay tuned because I'm going to be talking about sort of the pros and cons of subscribing versus using Tableau Public.
Yeah, and before you get back into this, I just want everybody to know the slides will be at our Road to Equal Justice Boston page. So I'll be putting everything in there from today, and I'll get Anne's slides as well.
Okay. Tim, should I start back up again, do you think?
Sure.
Okay, great. So just adjust my screen a little bit. So we're going to take what we learned so far in the workshop and apply it to a familiar challenge in this part of the workshop using the type of data you probably already have on hand. So the challenge is showing your funders, donors, board members, clients, and other stakeholders the reach of your organization. And the data that we're going to use is what I call pantry staple data. So it's just the kind of data that most organizations already have on hand. And we're going to be using Tableau Public. So you can, as I was just mentioning, you can subscribe to Tableau on a monthly or annual basis, but you can also use this free version called Tableau Public, and what we're going to be using today in this demonstration. Tableau Public has a lot of the same features as the paid version. The primary differences are, one, there are fewer data connection options with Tableau Public. So when you subscribe, you can connect your data to a broad number of different types of databases, including Salesforce. You may have heard that Salesforce bought out Tableau Public. I mean, it's Tableau, not Tableau Public. It might be even 2 years ago now, or about 1.5 years ago now. But they still kind of function separately. So if you have a subscription, if you have Salesforce, you don't have Tableau. You still have to subscribe to it separately, although that may change in the future. So anyway, you can connect Tableau to a number of different databases. Tableau Public, there are a number of connections you can use, including Excel and Google Sheets, but it's much more limited. The other major difference between the subscription and Tableau Public is that when you create anything with Tableau Public, you can't save it to your desktop or to your own organization's server. You have to save it to the Tableau public server. And it is indeed a public server. So this is not good for sensitive data. If you got data that includes identifying information like social security numbers, and names and birth dates, you're not going to want to put that on Tableau public. You're not going to want to include, health data, for example. But if you have de-identified data, data that doesn't include anything that would help, that would allow people to identify the people represented in the data, or it's just not sensitive data in any way, Tableau Public is a great resource. Really, a lot of my clients use it because they're just using de-identified data. And then I build them a really sophisticated data dashboard with Tableau. And then they're sort of off and running because all they had to do was pay for a short-term consultation with me. And then they got this really sophisticated tool and no ongoing cost for the software. So Tableau Public is a really great resource. It's also, if you're thinking about subscribing to Tableau, but don't want to sort of pull the trigger, it's a great way to learn Tableau and figure out whether it's a tool you want to invest in. So I'm happy to talk more about Tableau later if people have questions. Okay, so for the demonstration today, since we have limited time, here's the strategy I'm suggesting. Don't take notes or follow along in Tableau. Really just sit back, relax, watch what I'm doing, soak it in as best you can. If you've never seen Tableau, you'll probably soak in a little bit less than if you are a little bit familiar with it. But then later, try it on your own. I'm providing detailed instructions with this webinar, including how to download Tableau Public to your computer. I'm also providing the data file that I'll be using today. So you really can try this all on your own. Again, the instructions are very detailed. So there's just no reason to take notes today. But before we begin the demonstration, I just want to familiarize you with the Tableau worksheet view and some of its key features. So this is the worksheet view that you're looking at right now. It's what you'll be looking at most of the time when you're working in Tableau. And it's where you build a particular visualization. So one chart, one map, one graph, that sort of thing. To create a new worksheet, you click on this icon where the pointer is in the lower left-hand corner of the screen. This creates a new worksheet tab at the bottom of the screen, which you can name whatever you want. You'll see this in the demo. And worksheets can be duplicated and altered, which is a great feature. So if you build something you really like and you need a slightly different version of it, you can just duplicate it and alter it. Several worksheets can be dragged onto a dashboard, and that's the icon I'm pointing at here. That creates a dashboard. A dashboard shows several different charts at once, and they can use common filters, which you'll see in the demo. So that's the icon. It looks like a little window for creating a dashboard. Now let's talk about types of data you have to work with depending on the data set you're using. You'll probably have some data fields which Tableau calls dimensions. These are sort of those categorical data fields I was talking about before, things like age and date and location and ethnicity. Those are dimensions, or what's called dimensions in Tableau. And then you'll have some data fields that are measures, and these are your numerical data points. So in Tableau, the dimensions are shown in blue, and measures are shown in green. Tableau also automatically creates some measures and dimensions for you when you import data into Tableau. So one of them is used to be called number of records, which I thought was much more intuitive. Now what Tableau does is it names it for whatever the data file. So if your data file in Excel is called participant data, this field is going to be called participant data. But what it shows when you use it is the number of rows in your spreadsheet. So it can be very helpful for counting, you know, if each row in your spreadsheet represents a different person, it's the data field you're going to show whenever you want to show the number of people who've responded, for example, in different ways. So that's one thing that Tableau creates for you automatically. Also, if you have any geographic data fields in your data set, for example, zip code or city or state, Tableau will automatically calculate longitude and latitude for you. And you can see that under measures. And you can use these data fields to create maps, which we'll also see in the demo. Tableau also creates something called measure names and values that allow you to build certain types of views that involve multiple measures, but we won't go into that today in the demo. Okay, so the column shelf creates the columns of a table, and the row shelf creates the rows of the table. So those are what those things at the top are called, the column shelf and the row shelf. You can drag any number of measures or dimensions onto these shelves, and this will make more sense when you see it in the demo. When a measure or dimension is dragged to the filters pane, you can filter the view by that data field. So if you choose to show the filter, and you can also choose to show the filter, which allows the viewer to control the filter. So for example, if I dragged state onto the filters pane, and then I choose to show that filter, the viewer can look at trends in participation, you know, over the past 5 years, for example, for all 50 states. If it's a nationwide program, but the filter would allow you to filter to just show trends in Massachusetts or just show trends in Illinois. So that's what happens when you pull something onto the filters pane. When you drag measures and dimensions to the view, the data are displayed using marks. So marks are those encodings we talked about. It's bars and circles and squares and those sort of things that are sort of represent the data. Marks can be displayed in a number of different ways. Tableau faults to certain types of marks depending on the type of data that you drag into view, but you can always change the marks yourself, and the type of mark you use and the mark properties are controlled by what's called the marks card, which is what you're looking at here. And we'll also see this in action in a moment. Okay, finally, I just want to mention this Show Me tab in the upper right-hand corner. It creates a view based on the fields already used in the view, so anything that you've already dragged out onto one of those shelves, or any fields that you've selected in the data pane, which is that pane you saw on the left-hand side that shows all the different dimensions and measures. It will kind of say, okay, these are the data fields you want to use, and then it will show you some different chart types that you might want to use to display that data. And then if you like one of those chart types, you can click on it and it will automatically create the chart for you, and then you can adjust it however you would like. By adjusting the axes or the mark properties or whatever you want to change. So it's a great feature in Tableau that you should know about, but I'm not going to be using it today in the demo. Okay, so before we launch into the demo, just wondering if there are any questions. If not, I'll just go ahead and do this demo. Okay, so the first thing I want to show you, I'm sorry, I'm going to just get this off my screen, is what we're going to be working towards today. So it's what I call a map dashboard. I'm going to show it to you in full screen. So this is where we're going to start working on building today. And I just wanted to show you a number of features that that are on this map dashboard. So the data comes from the Chicago, and again, I'm in the Chicago area. Sorry, we don't have Boston specific data today. But it comes from the Chicago Micro Lending Institute, which trains and develops micro lenders to expand small business financing in Chicago. I would suspect that you have similar organizations in Boston. The circles in the map show the location, specifically the zip code area of small business owners who've received these microloans. And the size of the circle shows the number of loans in that zip code. So you can see I can scroll over these different circles and I can see what the zip code is and how many loans there were in each. The bar chart on the right shows the industries that these microloans went to. So we can see it's in descending order. So we could see most of the loans went to professional and office services and other services and food and beverage. Very few loans went to retail services, clothing and design and catering, for example. And then this map dashboard uses a cool feature which allows one viz to filter the others. So if I only want to see these 9 loans that went to 60622, I can click on that circle on the map. And what happens is that the bar chart filters to just those 9 loans, and I can see what industries they went to. Click again to unfilter. And similarly, I can filter the map using the bar chart. So if I only want to see where in Chicago these 10 daycare loans went to, I can click on that bar and it will show me the zip code areas that got the daycare loans. And click again to unfilter. So that's what we're working towards today. I just wanted to kind of give you a sense of where we're going. So the next thing I want to do is to give you a peek at the actual data. And I'm sorry, I'm looking, I have a computer full of files. So I'm just looking, here we go. Here's my data. So as you can see, it's a CSV file or comma separated or also called a text file but that's just opened in Excel, and it should look like a very familiar type of file to you. So each row in this file represents a single loan made through the Chicago Microlending Institute. And you can see we have a certain amount of information on each loan. We have the loan date, we have the lender, we have a bunch of columns that get at the location of the loan. So we have the address, city, state, zip. Chicago's divided into wards. So we have ward number, then we have the industry that it went to. And then we also have actually location data, latitude and longitude, which we're not going to be using because we're going to just use the latitude and longitude that Tableau automatically generates for us. But this is what the data file looks like. So let's go ahead and get into Tableau and actually visualize this data. Sorry about that. Let me find my Tableau file. Bear with me for a second. I'm not seeing my file. Here we go. Okay. So again, in your instructions that you'll be receiving, you will get instructions on how to download Tableau. But once you download Tableau and you open it, this is what you'll be looking at. And to connect to the data, you just click on connect to data. So that's what we'll do. We're going to click on connect. My file again was a text file, so I'm going to choose text file. And then I'm going to, here's my text file that I want to use. So I'm going to click on that and click open. And as you can see, the first thing Tableau does is sort of recreate your spreadsheet, but within Tableau. So here's, it looks just like what we were looking at in Excel a few moments ago. And the first thing you want to do is just to make sure that Tableau is accurately recognizing the different data types. So as you can see, Tableau has added a little icon to the top in the column headers. And we want to make sure that it's sort of accurately labeled each one of these data types. So it thinks that loan date is a date because it's given it this little calendar icon. That's correct. ABC is what it uses for what we call string, which is another name for those categorical kinds of variables or data fields. So it's recognized a bunch of columns as string data accurately. It's recognized city as a geographic data field because it's given it this little globe icon, same with state and zip. It thinks that ward is a number or measure data field, which is not correct, right? Because really they're just names for different wards. You can't add together Ward 48 and Ward 1 to get Ward 49. These are, so they're just names. So I'm going to change it from the number symbol to string, and then it will show it ABC there because it's really just a string data field. And then industry, of course, is string, and we're not going to worry about location because, again, we're not going to be using it. Okay, so now Tableau knows what my data is all about. So I'm going to click on sheet number 1 to create that map. So I'm going to click on sheet number 1, and you can see now I have my dimensions and my measures in this data pane on the left. And to create a map is extraordinarily easy in Tableau. And it's almost like magic. I'm going to take the zip code, and all I'm going to do is double click on it and watch what happens. So you can see data, it's a little bit of work, and right away it creates this map for me. If you're not familiar with the Chicago area, this big white area on the right is Lake Michigan, and then this is the Chicago area just to the left of it. And what Tableau has done is it's given me a mark. It's defaulted to a circle mark. You can see up here, it says automatic and shows circle. And it's given me 1 mark for every zip code that's in my data set. So as you may recall, we don't want all these marks to be the same size, right? We want the marks to be larger if there have been more loans and smaller if there have been fewer loans. Really easy to do that in Tableau too. Remember, we have this measure that Tableau automatically created for us, which gives us the number of rows in our data file, and it names it for our data, the name of our data file, which was CMI_ microloans. So I'm going to take that measure and just bring it over to the marks card and drop it on size. And then automatically Tableau resizes all these circles. So we have larger circles where there have been more loans and smaller ones where there have been fewer loans. And it gives me this size legend to the right. So I can see those really small circles are where there have been only 1 loan. The really big ones are where there have been 12 loans. Okay, so we're kind of well on our way already to making that map dashboard. And next, I want to just do some things to sort of clean up the look of it. There's lots of different options for changing the look of a map. And some of them are under what's called the map drop-down menu here at the top. So I'm going to click on that, and then I'm going to click on map layers. And anytime you click on one of these menu items at the top, you get a bunch of options here on the left-hand side of the screen. So you can see I have a number of different options, and it shows you the default settings that we're on right now. You can see there's a number of different styles that we can use for our map. I'll just show you a couple. Like there's this outdoor style. There is a dark style. I'm gonna today use the street style. You can see there's different layers of information, like showing streets and street names, like the base, city names, that kind of thing. I'm going to get rid of a lot of those layers. Actually, I'm going to get rid of all those layers just to make it much simpler, following that direction to get rid of the unnecessary. So I'm getting rid of a lot of information, as you can see. But I'm going to add a layer here at the bottom. You can see there are some data layers. So it's data that's already built into Tableau. So when I click on that menu, you can see Tableau already has in it data on, for example, household income. So if I wanted to show household income, I could choose that, and it will automatically put household income behind my marks and give me this color legend here. Today, I think I'm going to just use population, and we'll see more about how this helps with my look. But I can also change the washout here, just to make it a little bit lighter if I wanted to. Okay, so those are some of your options when you're creating a map. I'm good for now with where I am. I'm gonna, oh, actually, I'm sorry. I'm gonna change my map layer to, rather than showing it by state, I'm gonna show it by zip code area. So you can see how that changes. And it also just gives me an outline to each one of my zip codes. Okay, so I'm gonna click this X button to get out of my map layers. And the next thing I wanna do is change my map background. So there's this format menu at the top that gives you lots of different options for changing the look of your visualization. I'm going to choose shading now. And again, I get a bunch of options on the left here. And I want to change the background so I don't have white here where Lake Michigan is. I just want a dark blue background, as we saw before. There's lots of different color options. Like if I know the exact color I want, I could click in that, could type in the hex number. You can play around with the different color options here, but I already have the color uploaded that I want. And just use this, I'm sorry, just use this blue option. So that gives me blue in the background there. And then I'm gonna just click out of format shading. I also want to now change the color of my marks again, which are circles, because now they're in blue, which isn't so good because I have a blue background. So anytime I'm dealing with any kind of properties of marks, I go to the marks card, I'm going to click on color. I'm going to choose orange for my mark color. And then I can choose whether I wanted to have a border or halo. I'm going to just choose none for both of those. And it's looking a little bit more like how I want it. This is downtown Chicago right here in the middle. It looks like I might have some marks that are overlapping each other. When that's the case, it's good to make your marks somewhat transparent. So I'm going to change this transparency under the color option to about 88. And that will help a little bit with seeing marks that are overlapping each other. Okay, so I think I'm pretty happy with the map as it is right now. So let's go on and create that bar chart. So I'm gonna remember, when you create a new visualization, you need a new worksheet because there's only one chart per worksheet. So I'm gonna go back down here. You can see right now I'm on sheet number 1. I can change the name of that sheet by just double clicking on it and calling it something more understandable like map. And then I'm going to click on the symbol for a worksheet with the little plus on it to create a new worksheet, which is now called sheet number 2. I'm going to double click on that and just call it, excuse me, bar chart. Okay. So, so now, as you may recall from the example, I want to show the number of loans per industry. So the first thing I'm going to do is drag my industry dimension and put it on rows. And you can see that automatically gives me all the different industries that are represented in that column that was called industry in my data set. And then I'm going to again take this number of rows measure and drop that on columns. And you can see Tableau automatically defaults to a bar chart. If I wanted to change it, I can go under my marks card and choose a something different, like for example, squares. But I want to keep it with bars, so I can keep it on automatic or just choose bars. The next thing I want to do is put this data in descending order, again, to make it easier for visual analysis. Tableau has these nice little order buttons here at the top. So I'm going to just choose the one for descending order. And it automatically puts all my bars in descending order. Then I also want to, again, to sort of ease the cognitive load for my viewers, just label each one of these bars directly rather than make them, you know, kind of make their eye travel down to the x-axis to figure out how many loans there were in each industry. So I'm going to, again, take this number of records or number of rows, which represents, in my case, number of loans, and just drag that and drop it on label. And then it automatically labels each bar with the number of loans for that industry. Now I don't really need this x-axis anymore. So I'm going to just right-click on it and uncheck show header. And so I've gotten rid of that. So I'm kind of simplifying what we're looking at. I don't think I need this industry header either. So I'm going to right-click on that and choose hide field labels for rows. So we're simplifying it even more. Then let's see, one more thing I might want to do is get rid of, it's very faint, but I do have these column dividers that I don't want anymore. So I can go under, there's a number of different ways to do this. Well, one way is to go under format and choose lines and just go under columns and get rid of grid lines. I might want to go, you might see there's a light gray line here along the bottom. I might want to get rid of that so I would go under rows here and then under grid lines, say none. Oops, for zero line, that didn't get rid of it. Maybe I just need to say no for axis. That didn't get rid of it either. I'm gonna try it under sheet. Okay, there we go. So now we've gotten rid of that axis line. Okay, so then so now we have a bar chart and a map. How do we put them together in the same dashboard? That's our next task. So I'm gonna click that dashboard icon at the bottom. As you can see in this dashboard view, we have our two sheets. We have our map, and if I scroll over it, I get a little thumbnail version of the map, and we have the bar chart. There's a thumbnail version of that. Before I drag those onto the dashboard, I want to consider the size of my dashboard. So you can see you have a number of different size options. It defaults to a sort of minimum width and height and a maximum width and height. But rather than using this range option, I can use a fixed size. So if I know exactly what the size of the screen of the device my users are going to use are, I can choose from a number of different options here. For example, they have a generic desktop option, so you can see that's larger, but there's also like a PowerPoint option, and that's even larger. I could do letter landscape, which is a little bit smaller. Another option you have under size is, rather than doing a fixed size, choose automatic. And as it says right here, the dashboard will resize to fit any screen it's displayed on, which sounds more wonderful than it actually is. If you really want to have a lot of control over the look of your visualization, I would suggest not going with this automatic sizing, because it's going to kind of change the look depending on the size of the device that your user's using. But it's fine for this demonstration, so I'll just stick here. Okay, so when you drag a sheet onto a dashboard, you have the option of doing it in a tiled way. So in the lower left-hand corner here, it says tiled or floating. So if I drag something in and I have tiled selected, it fills up sort of all the space available. So we'll see right now, I'm going to pull in the map, and it's going to fill up all the space available on my screen. It's also going to include the size and color legend for me. So I'm going to actually get rid of these legends because I don't need them. So I'm going to just click on them and click the X to get rid of them. And so here we have the map filling up all the space available. If I pull on the bar chart and keep it at tiled, the bar chart will, you can see I'm just pulling it in with my mouse clicked down, and before I release my mouse, it will show me sort of the options of where I can place it. And all the options are 50% of the screen. So if I want it over here, I can just let go of my mouse here. I can let go of my mouse here. I'm going to do it on this side here. So that's how you get two charts on one dashboard. Another way to bring it, I'm going to click this X button whenever you can tell which chart you have selected because there's a gray outline around it. So I've selected the bar chart. I'm going to click on this X to get rid of it because I'm also going to show you what it's like to float in a sheet in Tableau onto a dashboard. So now I've checked floating, and if I pull my map in now, oops, why is it not pulling in? Oh, I'm sorry, I'm on my map. And then if I'm pulling in the bar chart now, it will just float in and I can place it exactly where I want it to. So if I want to sort of place it in the middle of Lake Michigan, I can do that. I can also resize it how I like. I can right click on this bar chart to hide the title. Okay, so that's another way to bring in sheets onto a dashboard in Tableau. And let's see, I think I'm not going to, there are all kinds of things we can do to clean up this view, like get rid of the background here. I'm not going to go into all those details now because I basically covered everything I want to show you. I think the main thing I have left that I would like to show you is how to use the map to filter the bar chart and the bar chart to filter the map. So again, right now I have the map selected because it's outlined in gray. And to make it filter the bar chart, I go up to these options in the upper left-hand corner here. You can see this tiny icon that looks like a funnel. If I click on it, it turns white. And what that's telling Tableau to do is to use this chart to filter other charts on the dashboard. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to select the bar chart. And I have the same options here in the upper right-hand corner. And I'm going to click on the funnel. And that tells Tableau to use the bar chart to filter other charts on the dashboard. So now when I click on the map, it filters the bar chart. Unclick to unfilter, and same with the bar chart. Okay. There are other directions in the instructions you'll be receiving to make it look more exactly like what I showed you in the demo at the beginning of the demo, but we won't go into all those steps now. Lastly, I just want to show you how to save what you create in Tableau. So you just go under File, Save to Tableau Public. You can call it whatever you want. I'm going to call it Example Friday. Click Save. It'll take a little while, but what it will do is it's sending data to the server. If you haven't already signed into Tableau Public, it will prompt you. I'm sorry. It will prompt you to enter in your username and password, and then it will just save it to your profile on Tableau Public. And you can click Edit Details here. And there are a number of different options, including these checkboxes. Like you can uncheck here where it says allow others to download or explore or copy this workbook and its data. So that's something I often uncheck so people can't download my data file. And I can click Save here. If you go to your you can go to your own profile up here where it says My Profile. And You can control whether other people can see it or not. So this is what, if you click others here, you can see what they can see on your, in your profile. They can only, in this case, they can only see 3 of my projects, but if I click on me, you can see I have many more projects in there. They just can't see it. So if you can toggle with this little eye icon, and if I toggle it now, others can see it, and I toggle it back, now others can't see it. So that's one way of sort of hiding what you create. So if you don't want people to be able to Google and find it, you can just, sort of do this hiding option. Okay, so that's all I'm going to say about Tableau. There's much more to say, but that gives you a taste of what Tableau can do. I'm going to just close out of all that. I'm happy to answer some questions now. And if there aren't any questions, I'm happy to jump back into the rest of the presentation.
So Amelia, it looks like we have 2 questions that have come in since you started.
Okay.
One is, will Tableau work for more sensitive data on donors or our customers? Is it secure?
So the security is, as I described, if you have data, for example, that includes your donors' names and how much they've donated to your organization, I would not suggest using Tableau Public for that. Again, you can hide the visualization from anyone who doesn't have the URL, but URLs have a way of getting out there, right? So if you included a URL, for example, in an email, and someone else forwards it to someone who shouldn't have access to it, they're going to have access to that visualization and that data. So it's not a great solution for sensitive data like that. But if you have donation data that you have quote unquote de-identified, so you've removed any identifying information like names and addresses and that sort of thing, and you just replace them, for example, with donor ID numbers, that could be a great way of showing your donation data to the world, because there's no way of knowing who gave what, but you're showing your donations in aggregate form, and you can even drill down to individual donations, but no one will know who made that donation. So I hope that answers that question.
And the other question was from April, who says, do you have other recommendations for data visualization tools?
Tableau is my favorite. It's the one that I use the most, so that's why I'm showing it to you. I think Excel and Google Sheets are perfectly fine for some simpler visualizations, particularly static ones, non-interactive ones. I'm not, the other like kind of big names out there, there's that's like Google Studio, there's Power BI, there's, if you know the statistical program that's free called R, there's something called R Studio, but they kind of vary. So to me, data visual tools exist on a continuum. At one end of the continuum are the sort of, I think of them as sort of black box programs. So you just kind of feed in the data and it spits out a chart for you, but there's very little customization that you can do in that chart. At the other end of the continuum are programs like a program called D3. That's what the New York Times uses. And it's kind of the pinnacle of data visualization, but you need to know a lot of programming language to use it. So the learning curve couldn't be steeper than it is for D3. Programs like Tableau and Power BI exist in the middle of that continuum. So to me, they're sort of the best of both worlds. There is lots of customization you can do with them. So you can create really sophisticated, highly customized visualizations, but they're drag and drop tools. So you don't need to know a lot of programming language in order to learn them. That being said, Tableau markets itself as sort of out of the box, start visualizing data tomorrow. And I've yet to meet anyone who I guess, outside of Tableau who agrees with that characterization. There's still definitely a learning curve with Tableau. If you know Tableau well, there's a lot of really sophisticated, wonderful things you can do with it. But you may not have the time and resources to learn Tableau in-house. So that's kind of my market niche, is that organizations that don't want to develop this skill set in-house, they hire me to create interactive data dashboards for them. They often, as I mentioned, use Tableau Public. So they end up with something really cool and sophisticated at the end of the consultancy. I teach them how to refresh the data if it's not already connected to live data. And then they're kind of off and running. They didn't need to know, learn all of Tableau in order to get these dashboards and to use them on a daily basis.
That's great. And I think that's all our questions for now. Okay,
great. So let's move on. So resources to continue your data visualization journey. As I mentioned, there's a lot of visualization you can do with, you probably already have Excel or in Google Sheets, and there's a lot of visualization you can do just with those tools. And these are some video series that I like for learning more about visualizing data in Excel and Google Sheets. I think they're very clearly presented video tutorials on using those tools. So that's in your, I mean, you're going to get these slides, but I think this is also in your handout. To learn Tableau, Tableau itself, of course, has lots of tutorials online that are free, that are great to use. I'd also really point you to the Tableau public gallery. That's where people who have created visualizations with Tableau, who want to share them with the world, can post them. Basically, if you make your visualizations non-hidden, they will be on Tableau Gallery. Although certain really great visualizations are featured on Tableau Gallery. And it's a great way to sort of just get inspired and see what Tableau can do. If you see something you really like, you can download, and the user, whoever created it has given you the permission. You can download the worksheet or the workbook and sort of reverse engineer it to figure out how they created it. You can even try replacing their data with your own data. That can be tricky sometimes, but it's an option. On my own website, again, my organization is called Data Viz for Nonprofits. I have a blog called 60-Second Data Tips. And you can sign up on my website, and I will send you, mostly on a weekly basis, just a very brief data tip that takes 60 seconds or less to read. And so you can sort of gradually and painlessly up your data game that way. If you want, feel free to just put your email address, if you feel comfortable doing so, in the chat window right now, and I will sign you up for you. Here are some data viz gurus who I really like and who I follow and you might want to follow. I already mentioned Edward Tufte as being kind of the grandfather of modern data visualization. I just want to point out a couple names here. Anne Emery and Stephanie Evergreen and John Schwabish. They all have blogs. Anne and John both have podcasts as well, and they talk more about the kinds of data that are going to be familiar to all of us, government data and nonprofit data. The others talk more about corporate data, but a lot of it is translatable in a nonprofit context as well. Okay, so we are at the bonus round. I have 3 bonus topics. So I can talk about how to make over your PowerPoint presentation. So data visualizations also often make their premiere in PowerPoint presentations. And I have 3 very simple points to improve your PowerPoint presentations that include data visualizations. So that's one bonus topic. Another bonus topic is how to consume data viz. So we've been talking a lot about how to create data visualizations, but we all read reports and websites and newspaper articles that have charts, maps, and graphs in it. And if you're like me, sometimes they're like, oh, wow, that's really beautiful, but what does that mean? So I have some simple tips on how to extract meaning from data visualizations more easily. And then the third one's kind of my game show where I present to you some visualizations and you have to tell me what's wrong with them. It's kind of testing your knowledge after participating in this workshop. So these are data visualizations that are problematic in some way, and you have to figure out why they're problematic. So Tim, do you want to do the little survey thing, or?
I just realized I didn't set that up for this call.
Okay, that's fine. Why don't people just, no problem. If there's a topic you really want to hear about next, please just put it in the chat. PowerPoint makeover, I see a vote for. We might have time to get through all, okay, PowerPoint. Okay, I'm gonna just go ahead and do PowerPoint, and then we'll see, you know, we'll definitely have time for one more, maybe both of the others we'll be able to do. So PowerPoint is next. So let's talk about how to do a PowerPoint makeover. It's just getting cut off a little bit. Are you seeing the whole slide, Tim? Yeah, I guess you are. Okay, so I'm going to talk about 3 rules for making a better PowerPoint presentation. The first is slides are for seeing. So think about the last time you saw a subtitled movie. Did you miss a lot of the action while you were reading the subtitles? Research shows that we're all quite good at simultaneously processing pictures and spoken words, but our brains go in overdrive when processing pictures plus written text. Which of course is what we do during the subtitled movie, right? And that our brains can completely shut down when processing written text plus spoken words, which is what we ask audiences to do a lot during PowerPoint presentations. We're listening to our presenter saying one thing and at the same time trying to read bullet points that say something similar, but not exactly the same. So here's what I consider a really bad PowerPoint slide. This is sort of the before slide, and I'm going to show you the after slide in a moment. So the reason why I hate this slide is there's lots of text and bullet points, one really bad, rather small visualization in the corner. And here, I'm going to kind of give you a PowerPoint experience. Okay, so look at the slide and listen to me talk about the slide. Okay, I'm going to just do this for a few seconds. Okay, so look at the slide. I'm about to talk about the slide. The respondents to the survey were mostly females residing in suburbs, but a large minority lived in urban areas. The large majority were reported to be white, and as you can see, although we had a range of ages, most were in the 40 to 49 bracket, which differed from past surveys, which had more respondents in the 20 to 29 bracket. Okay, so end of experiment. Did you hear everything I said, or did you absorb all the information on the slide? Probably not, right? You probably experienced a bit of what I call brain cacophony, which is a term to use that sort of, to describe that sort of feeling of being overwhelmed and confused by too much information crowding the verbal brain channels all at once. Okay, so here's my after slide, which you can see is quite different. It just involves one brief takeaway and a bold image that reflects the takeaway. There's no chart at all, right? It would be much easier to listen to me talk while looking at this slide than at the earlier slide with all the bullet points and charts. It just bolsters what I'm saying rather than competing with it. And so just, and another point I want to make is that although I love data visualization, a PowerPoint presentation with every single slide includes a map or chart or graph can be really overwhelming. So you really need to break it up with slides like this that are still presenting your data, but just presenting it with a compelling image and very little text. Okay, so my second rule is portion control. So the hard truth is that our audience members are going to walk away from our presentations retaining just a few ideas, whether we like it or not. So if we shower them with lots of ideas and lots of data, we don't control which ones they retain, right? So choose just a few data points or messages and then weed out the rest. Then feature only one idea per slide and go easy on charts, maps, and graphs. As I mentioned before, they can be more difficult to process than images. So we need these cognitive breaks between charts. And rule number 3 is to obey visual hierarchy. So what do I mean by that? Visual hierarchy is a term used in graphic design, and it means the arrangement or presentation of visual elements in a way that implies importance. So it basically tells you what to look at first, what to look at second, what to look at third. And the way it does that is by using size and color. So larger, more brightly colored text and images are going to be looked at first, and more muted colored objects or images and smaller text is going to get less attention and be looked at later. We can also draw attention to images and objects by putting white space around it. So think about visual hierarchy when you're presenting data visualizations. So here's a chart that I think does quite well with visual hierarchy. So I've simplified the slide with just one compelling image or chart, which itself has been stripped down just to the bare minimum of what is necessary. I've made sure there's plenty of white space around the image to give it prominence. And then I've enlarged only the most important text and colored it while reducing the size and muting the color of the less important text. Okay, so do we, let's see, are people interested in how to consume data? Should I just go through all of it, Tim, or do you want to end early? I guess that's the question.
What do you think? Like maybe, do you want to do one more and then we can let everybody?
Yeah, that's a good idea.
A little bit early.
So do people prefer how to consume data, or do they want to do the game show, what's wrong with this chart? Any votes at all? Game show.
One for game show. How to consume data for another.
Right.
We need a tiebreaker.
Yeah. Another
game show.
Okay, I'll just go with the game show, and so you can see a little preview. Oops. Okay, what's wrong with this chart? Okay, so pay attention because this requires participation. Okay, so here's chart number 1. Sorry, it's a little fuzzy there. So what is wrong with this chart? This was presented on Fox News, as you can see, quite a while ago. And it has a number of problems. What problems do you see? Okay, April, you are correct. It equals greater than 100%. You can't add up 63, 70, and 60 to get 100. And any other problems with it? That's the main problem for sure. Think about some things I said during the presentation. Was this really presented? Yes, evidently it was. I don't watch a lot of Fox News, but if you look it up online, it was presented. I think they retracted it later. Yeah, the other problems with it, again, you know, that bright, fully saturated color issue, 70% looks smaller. Yeah, and I know you could be right, Samantha. Again, you know, we have, we're not so good at assessing angles, so it could be one of those sort of visual deceptions, but I'm not sure in this case, because also that 3D problem, although, so maybe that's why 70% looks smaller, because it's supposed to look like it's sort of further back in space. So yeah, I would say the color issue, the 3D issue, and definitely the math issue are all concerns here. Let's try another one. Okay, this one's not as interesting to look at, but there is a problem. It's a little bit more subtle. Can anyone figure out what the problem is here? Ooh, maybe I've stumped everyone. Cool. I will tell you, since it looks like you're stumped. So what's happening in that chart, the chart on the top is one you were just looking at, is it's truncated the y-axis. So what happens is that makes it look like the differences among the different groups are much starker than they really are. So rather than starting at 0 as on the y-axis as the chart on the bottom does, it starts at 9100. So it's making these, as a result, the bars look like they differ in size much more, because we're kind of just zooming in on that part of the chart, than if we started at 0, where we see these groups are really kind of more similar in size. So it's kind of a way of deceiving. There's a funny, but also really informative book called How to Lie with Charts by Daryl Huff. It was written way back in the 1950s, but he talks about this problem of truncating the y-axis. Okay, let's do another one. What do you guys see in this chart? I'll give you a hint. Look at the y-axis again. Often problems come from the y-axis. Upside down, very good, April. So yes, at first glance, it looks like gun thefts are on the decline in Florida, but a closer look shows that the y-axis is upside down with 0 at the top and the maximum value at the bottom. So as gun deaths increase, the line slopes downward, violating a well-established convention that the y values increase as we move up the page. Okay, let's try another one. This is another actual chart presented in Georgia. Hard to read for sure, yeah. There's a lot going on for sure. And it's a little fuzzy too, so I apologize for that. Okay, so let me just tell you about this chart. This graph is from the Georgia Department of Public Health. Oh, chronological order, yes, very good, Ariel. They took out the data. Was this the one where they took out the data? I'm not sure what you mean by that. Let me just tell you a little bit about it. Maybe that'll answer your questions. Colors are kind of close. Yeah, that's true. So this graph is from the Georgia Department of Public Health's website. It's now sort of infamous. It has been taken down. The original chart, which is what you're looking at, was later corrected, did not present the dates along the x-axis in chronological order. So you can see we kind of we go from May 1st to April 30th to May 4th. And it just kind of goes back and forth. There's May 3rd and April 26th, followed by May 3rd. Moreover, the bars, which each represent a different county, were presented in different orders on different dates. So the result, according to Morgan McFall Johnson at the Business Insider, quote, seemed to bend both time and place to achieve a clean descending staircase effect. So let me show it to you in its corrected version. So you can see before it looks like there was sort of a descending pattern, but when you present the data in chronological order and present the counties in the exact same order for each date, you can see there's far from a descending effect. So as I mentioned before in the presentation, when presenting values that have an inherent order, such as dates, we should present them in that order. But we shouldn't rearrange, like, for example, these bars to suggest an order that doesn't actually exist. Okay, so I'm happy to do that consumption of data, but I also know we've been in this for a long time and people have other stuff to do and it's Friday. So Tim, I'll take it from you, how you want to proceed.
Yeah, I think we'll go ahead and call it a day. Save everybody's energy for next week too. We've got it's kind of more of a marathon the next 3 weeks. Really appreciate the presentation, Amelia. Great job. I know you had a lot to cover and you included a ton of lessons and best practices in there. For everybody who didn't see it in the chat window, I'm going to be sharing those slides today on our Road to Equal Justice Boston page. And that includes the data and that Amelia showed. Any final words, Amelia?
I don't think so. Again, please sign up for the 60-second data tips if you want to hear more from me in the future. And that's it. It's been great being with you all today.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in. Next week, I know a lot of you said that you wanted more on media and social media strategies, and we'll have Ashley Reed. She was formerly at Hootsuite. She's going to be discussing social media strategies for activists. Stephen Constant is an expert in media and storytelling techniques. He's worked with AT&T and Time Warner and Visa, and he's working with a lot of nonprofits now. So that'll be very exciting. And we'll have Generation Citizen from Boston here next week to discuss youth empowerment and media advocacy. And everybody should have got a link to that already for the chat, but let me know if you didn't do that or didn't get it, and then I'll send it to you. And then finally, I put a link to our Excel, our agenda, and it's got a registration there as well. So you can forward it out to any organizations you think might be interested in that. So thanks again. Have a great weekend and hope to see you next Friday. And thanks, Amelia.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Thank you, everybody.